The following is a presentation of Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV, the viewer's guide to genre television.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Buffy Earpers. My name is Kevin Batchelder, and welcome to our episode number 24, where we're going to be covering a couple of Season 4 episodes, The Initiative, episode 407, and Pangs, episode 408. And on this podcast, I am joined by Carol Malcolm. Welcome to the podcast, Carol.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm looking forward to talking about my favorite show.
There we go. Yeah, and some of the Earpers certainly are going to be familiar with your name or voice since we've had you on the Tales of the Black Badge a couple of times.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I guess I should say that I do. I'm the director of the Urban Fantasy Track at Dragon Con, and which is how I actually met Kevin. And we've been fortunate enough to have many of the ERP cast members with us a couple of different times. So I think it was 2017 and 2019. And we're hoping that we'll get them back again at some point in time.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And it's great that, both Winona Earp and Buffy are covered by the Urban Fantasy Track. We get to have fun talking about them every year.
Yes.
So that's where I knew, once we started doing guest co-hosts here, I knew I had Carol on my list to make sure we made some time to get her on. So I suspect this won't be the last time we've got Carol here joining us.
Well, I'll be happy to come back anytime. Thank you.
All right. Now, for those who might be new to the podcast, and we do know we hear from folks who tell us they jump in at different points, we will be spoiler-free. For the majority of this podcast, we'll only cover things that have happened in Buffy up through these episodes, episode 408, till we get near the end when we will very clearly mark that we're moving into spoiler territory where anything from the series might go. So if you are a newbie, you should be totally fine. Stick with us. We won't spoil you here for the majority of the podcast. And for those who like to look ahead, plan ahead, the next podcast we'll be doing in a few weeks' time, we'll be covering two episodes again. We'll be covering episode 409, Something Blue, and 410, Hush. So look for that to be coming in the coming weeks. We know it's been a few months since we put out a podcast. For those of you that are regular listeners, you know we do this one between seasons of Winona Earp. And between the pandemic and the breaking up of season 4 and 2 airing parts, kind of threw off our timing here, but should be doing episodes on a fairly regular basis in the coming months, so we're going to have a good time.
Those are fun ones, too, those next two. Those are great episodes.
A lot of good stuff coming up in season 4, so yes. Looking forward to it. But before we do get there, we've got our two episodes to cover. So let's jump into some episode discussions here, starting with episode 407, The Initiative. This one is very much, I know I've seen in some of the books covering Buffy that the episode 7s always tend to be a bit of the plot dump.
Okay.
Where they do tend to give us a lot of the information about what's going on in that particular season. And certainly I would say this is one for season 4.
Yeah, that's true because, even after seeing it multiple times, I try to think back to the very first time I saw it. Try to, when you're watching, if you were like you and I, watching the show, which I think you did, you watched it when it aired, correct? Or did you discover it later on?
No, I came to it on DVD just after it finished.
Oh, okay. Well, for me, I did watch it when it was first on TV. So, of course, I had to wait, a whole week to find out what would happen. So the cliffhangers were true cliffhangers or, the big surprises were, they were always very interesting just from that perspective of looking back now. And that's, having seen it multiple times. But, I kind of get that where you talk about it being a plot dump. That does make sense.
Yeah, I mean, as we get here, we've been wondering about some of the things that have been going on, some of the new characters here in season 4, Riley and the gang, kind of wondering their connection to Buffy and the Scooby Gang. So it certainly plays out here when we get the party, which made for some fun watching Willow try to help Riley.
Yeah.
As far as working with Buffy, and then suddenly we realize that Riley and the gang are the military types that we've seen a little bit of. So I love that they, keep us on our toes, making us wonder what's going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you think about it, even watching it multiple times, the way that Riley comes off when we see him. He even tells Willow at one point that, I'm always good at everything. I'm good at everything I do. I apply myself and I'm good at it. But he's, at a loss when it comes to, as he calls it, courting a girl. And so he's, he looks so out of his depth, but then we see him a few minutes later getting off the elevator inside the initiative where we've just, earlier in the episode seen Spike and a bunch of other supernatural creatures in cages. So it's kind of different when it's a little bit jarring to see him do that and then go from being, in charge of this, of this little group and, of his particular section. So it's kind of, I think that it is probably kind of weird to anybody seeing it the first time, because it's still weird to me, just seeing that difference.
Yes, it is. And that's part of the fun, I think, in a lot of the development in Buffy, certainly over 7 seasons. And so many characters, as you start to see someone in a certain light, like you described, and you see Riley a little bit on the awkward side, and then you do get to see him in the military side, and certainly being a lot more adept and comfortable doing some of the things there. So that is certainly some of the character development, whether we like certain characters or don't, that we get to see play, and they do a really good job in Buffy.
Yes. And speaking of awkward, how about in the very opening scene, Buffy trying to negotiate the dining hall machinery? That was pretty funny. So, oh my gosh.
That's where we, even 4 seasons in now, get to enjoy when the outside world is looking at Buffy and thinking, making decisions or expectations of her that we know are far, far from the truth.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's certainly, too, for the case now, we're in the college setting instead of the high school setting. As many of us remember, each of those venues brought different challenges and awkwardnesses and things to deal with, and they're certainly giving us some of those now that she's in the college environment. Because a lot of her interactions, certainly with Professor Walsh, including some in this episode, and then finally seeing her in the initiative, that brings on all new meaning as well.
Right.
Yeah, she's got no gray area there with Walsh.
Yeah, and we think to ourselves when we first see her, just when she's this unpleasant college professor, we think, well, yeah, we don't like her. And then we find out, it just gets progressively worse. It doesn't get any better. It's not as though she does something to redeem herself, but we go there. I mean, by the time we, see her at the end of this episode, she's, she starts out by being mean to Willow, and then she's, she's not very pleasant to the guys that are under her command either, so. No,
not at all. There's some consistency there, certainly. And that's part of the fun, I think, in looking at this. The way she deals with students, much like the way she deals with her, underlings from a military point of view. Very, very similar. And then you get someone like Riley, who is very different when courting Buffy than he is with dealing with, handling, the hostiles and everything else he has to do. So this is, like you said, once it comes to rewatches, this is when it's fun, as you get to see it from some different perspectives.
Right.
Yeah. No, but I really enjoyed, we know that Willow has been in a funk, with everything that's gone on with Oz. She is still trying to deal with that. So seeing her kind of step up here to protect Buffy, but also help Riley, because I think she does kind of like him and thinks he might be good for Buffy. It's kind of fun. It's part of the fun of watching that develop. Now, speaking of Spike, I don't know if you can recall yourself too, but I mean, going back to first time seeing this episode, seeing all of the creatures that they had there, and then realizing that they had some type of experiments going on, I thought it was very appropriate that they would have captured Spike, but that they can't keep him for very long.
No, no, it cannot be contained. Yeah, I mean, when we see him, in that place and he's talking through the wall to the other guy, you feel bad for the other guy when essentially Spike, decides to use him as his shield. Well, he decides he'll let him out, but then he also kind of, decides to, I'm going to go this way and here you go this way, and tosses the poor guy, right at these people. So, and we later, I think we see him, in a later shot, when they show a bunch of the people, a bunch of the supernaturals getting experimented on. I think he's one of them. They don't show a close up of his face, but you get the impression that he's one of them that they, caught up to. And then you're like, oh, darn it, Spike, but hey, Spike is what he is,
Yeah, which is what makes him such an interesting character. Because, I mean, even just jumping around in the episode, I mean, by the end, once he's made his escape and actually ends up going after Willow, of all people.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, again, as we see new layers to the character. Because we're obviously very concerned for Willow and anyone else until we realize what the initiative has done to Spike.
Right.
I mean,
right.
What a brilliant way to allow him to kind of be part of the storylines without us having so much to worry about what he could do.
Exactly. And one of the things that I think is significant is when you hear the people in the initiative in this episode refer to him or to any of the others that they have there, they call them it. Whereas, that's not what the Scooby Gang, they would call him a he, or if, whatever the supernatural being is, they give them, that much dignity anyway, that they're not just a thing. They may be a bad person or a bad, whatever creature they are, but they still refer to them as something other than an it.
Yes, that's an excellent observation, Carol. Very, very true. Which is part of what we certainly see, from the initiative. Anytime they're talking about stuff, yes, they very much distance it themselves from it.
Right. So I found that significant, and I think it does it gives you a dividing line too between what it is that they do and what it is that Buffy and her folks do,
Mm-hmm.
and her group. It shows what their different attitudes are and what their approaches are.
Yep. Yeah. Excellent observation there. It's also quite entertaining to me going back on an episode like this, along with watching some of this plot develop, some of the excellent character stuff too that we've got here, because I mean, we've kind of jumped around a bit, but this episode also has a little earlier on, and without being spoiler, one of the most epic slap fights you will ever see. Oh, gosh. Between Xander and Harmony. I mean, that one is one for the ages.
Oh, it is. It's awesome. I bet, they looked as though they were having a blast doing it. That was hard for them to hide that. And I thought that was great. It's like you've got these two basically, comic relief characters that they're used for that. I mean, that's basically what we get from Harmony, most of the time. And Xander, it's different. I mean, with him it goes back and forth, but he is portrayed most of the time as kind of a goofball, because let's face it, he kind of is. But, when you see the two of them doing this together, it's just like, I don't care how many times I see it, it still makes me laugh out loud. It does. It's just that amusing. And it's the perfect, it's the perfect way for it to have gone. I mean, if it had been Giles who came up on her instead of Xander, it probably would have gone very differently.
Very true. Very true. But that was just, like you said, chef's kiss as far as watching the two of them, quote, have a fight that's nothing more than flailing arms and the two of them wishing it could stop.
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
It is. They do such a good job balancing that. I also thought one thing that's important near that end, while we have a little bit of fun talking about Spike and his performance issues, being unable to bite Willow, Willow is still in such a bad spot that she's thinking that she's the problem in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
It's me, isn't it? Yeah, poor Willow kind of situations. To have her even think that, so. Right.
And I mean, it's sad, and it's demonstrative of how how low she has gone in order to even say that, because it's like, well, why don't we wait a half hour and try again?
Yes.
I mean, the whole thing was just hilarious, but, of course we all know what it's supposed to be a parody of. So, that was, and that's a good point that she's, although she does kind of come into herself at the end, and she's like, that's when she decides to bonk him on the head and try to get away.
Mm-hmm.
But, she finally does come around. But yes, you're right. She does see it as being an issue with her initially. And then I think she kind of comes to her senses and she's like, wait a minute. Maybe I ought to try to get away from him.
Eventually, yes, once she's done talking him down.
Right.
And also that scene leads into a pretty epic confrontation in the hallway of the dorm between Buffy and the Initiative and Spike and flare guns and everything else. Got to give them credit for having lots of moving parts.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And, watching Buffy be able to take out many of them, which is certainly going to, and because of the flash grenades or whatever else they've got, none of them can truly see that it's Buffy at this point. They're still doing a good job of hiding who's who.
Right. Although there's one point that I even had a note to myself in my notebook. Did Riley actually know that it was Buffy, or did he think it might be? Because at one point we're seeing her through his eyes, and he can't see all that well either through the fog that they've created. I mean, they can see better probably than they could without the mask and the goggles and everything. But at that point, it was like, did he think it was someone that just looked like her, and it made him think we need to get out of here? Cause it's at that point that he's like, abort, and they had to leave. So I did wonder about that.
Yes, that's very true. But again, well played to be able to extend this, not knowing who Buffy is. Situation and all. Yeah. And of course, if you're going to have a crazy fight scene like this, Spike is going to have to get away to continue, his escape from all that's going on. So, it was a fun way to finish it off. I do know, in some of the information about the episode, how they talked about how, a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff, they've tried to establish that Spike's chip, doesn't allow him to bite anyone or actually even harm anyone. But if you look in the fight scene in the hallway, they mentioned in some of the commentaries that they realized that he was throwing people around left and right. So they kind of made him a oops situation and had to edit out a lot of that when they realized we're not even following our own canon at this point.
Right. Yeah, that is true. I hadn't really thought about that, but at the same time, it may have, I guess if they wanted to, they could have said, well, this speaks to intent. Like at that point, he's not really trying to harm anybody. He's trying to get away. So it was like a defensive kind of, he was enjoying throwing them around. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know. But that is a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. At least not this most recent time that I watched it. That didn't occur to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that is funny that they're trying to establish this and they mess it up in the very same episode. Oh well.
Yeah, again, I think that's part for the, director's continuity folks to realize, well, that's right, we can't have Spike having fun killing people and doing everything anymore. So it's just, again, one of those after the fact on the rewatches. If you look at the fight scene, you'll notice that several times you can tell they cut away from him very quickly for that reason. Once they tried to put it together, they couldn't really show us him doing too much of that.
Right.
But like you said, entertaining stuff. And that kind of leads us into Pangs. Now this is an episode 408, written by Jane Espenson. We do certainly mention when she pens an episode, certainly one of the long-term writers for the show and someone who's done some amazing stuff over the years. As a writer. So, this one has got, I know for folks, who look at the scope of the series, again, we have to keep in mind something that was done in the 90s, in terms of a time and of its time and so forth. Because part of what we've got here, along with some interesting history, the idea of dealing with the Native Americans and all that goes on here is not the most, aware approach to it. Again, we've got to keep in mind of the 90s, but I certainly appreciate it in this episode. And Jane, I think, does an excellent job in many of her episodes here, where we're going to balance some humor with this whole idea of Buffy really wanting to do this Thanksgiving meal,
right?
With the gang having to deal with some serious issues, and then even throw in at one point the fact that Spike is now involved with them. And balancing all of that really is just so much fun to watch them do.
Right. And I think though that within the episode, I felt as though, they were being at least sensitive about the history.
The history
now,
side, yes.
Yeah, the portrayal, maybe not. But, the portrayal of the Hoos character, but I guess you could kind of write that off as being, well, that is, he's actually a spirit. He's not, who's taken form to exert this, or exact this, revenge, but he's not really a person. He's a spirit. So maybe that would have something to do with how he was a bit awkward or something. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know what the thinking was there.
Mm-hmm. Nope, I follow. Again, it's something, this is fun when the series takes the time to kind of look at the different opportunities for story and where you go with some of these things from history and, creatures and mythos and so forth. So, yes, trying to use some of this idea that at the college, they're digging up to build something new and they come across something that hasn't been touched in hundreds of years and what the implications. Again, being Sunnydale, of course you're going to have implications.
Yeah, it's like, come on, what did you really think was down there?
Exactly.
That's what somebody at one point in the episode does say, well, it makes you wonder what else is under here. And Buffy, I think, is, says, well, I know it's a bunch of demons, but I mean, it was something to that effect. And, that's kind of a question that for Sunnydale, it has further implications, but it does make you wonder about just about anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It could be, any of us, although you'd think that you would probably have an idea if your own house was built over something, but who knows? We don't want to go poltergeist or anything. Yeah.
Well, that is true. You got to watch out for that. But I thought, like I say, the way of that part of the story playing out, from the initial killings to Xander getting sick because he's one of the construction folks, to, developing what's happening there. Again, I love how it's intertwined with all the scenes of Buffy and Giles and making all the Thanksgiving side dishes and everything else because she just wants to make this work so well to keep layering it in with everything else that's going on. Along with the fact that, you know, for those who aren't aware, this is part of a crossover episode with Angel. That,
right.
You know, certainly for someone like you watching it back in the original airing days, you know, you've got some stuff happening on Angel that leads into here, which is why he's in Sunnydale. So if you're only doing a Buffy watch, it seems rather odd that he shows up for just a couple of short scenes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I remember when Angel first began, there were people who would, well, not so much on the first, like if it was your first watch and you were, you know, watching them as they aired, then, you know, you would be getting them in a particular order anyway. But then I know, some people who would, when they would go back and rewatch the 2 seasons, the 4 of Buffy and the 1 of Angel, that they would do them, you know, like the way that you would have seen it on television, you know, in the order that they were released. You'd watch one of the Buffys and then one of the, you know, go back and do it that way just so that it would make more sense. But, anyway, I don't recall if I've ever done it that way. I think I may have to a certain extent, but, you know, after a while, if you've seen them enough times, I guess it's a little easier to keep track of what's going on, you know, when somebody turns up on a show that you're not expecting them to. It's like, wait a minute, didn't you leave like, you know, last season? Well, yeah.
And there will be some crossovers where it is very important to see both sides.
Right.
And again, won't get spoiler, but this one, it's more just for the sake of some fun crossover stuff. Especially at this point in the seasons of both, where we're still, you know, 7 episodes into our old style 22 episode seasons. You still got a long way to go plot wise for what's going to happen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Lots more to happen.
Yeah. So, I mean, along with the fun Thanksgiving prep and everything else going on with the gang trying to figure out what's up as Xander gets sicker and sicker, I got to say, I thought it was just brilliant that Spike shows up.
Oh yeah.
Just gets invited in because he's laying out that he can't bite anyone, and you know, they're after him too. James Marsters just does so well at this deadpan comedy, especially in an episode like this. It's just brilliant stuff.
Yes. Yes. And, you know, the way that Willow, you know, which interestingly had not mentioned it to anyone yet about what had happened with him, because the rest of them didn't know that he'd turned up over at the, you know, at the dorm. I mean, we all know that, but it seems as though nobody in this episode knew it except for Willow. And she hadn't bothered to mention it. Like, oh yeah, Spike stopped by and, you know,
yeah,
and he
tried to
couldn't
kill
do
me.
anything. Yeah, he tried to kill me, but he couldn't, you know, he couldn't do anything. So the fact that she has to, you know, kind of vouch for him. But I thought they did a nice job, juxtaposing some scenes there in the beginning before he actually turns up. Where, you know, they're talking about, you know, everybody should have a place to go. And then all of a sudden they switch to a scene of Spike kind of wandering the streets or wandering the woods, you know, with his, you know, with the blanket over him and, you know, looking all pathetic and everything. So, you know, they did a nice job of melding those two things. And, you know, yes, you know, Spike is a beast. And actually, speaking to that, from going back briefly to the previous episode, I found I made a note one of the last times I watched this, which who knows how long ago, but I think it was in the past couple of years, that when he does come into the room and he pretty much tosses Willow up against the dresser and just really, you know, throws her into this, not having any care about her at all. And, you know, that it was kind of a way to remind us of how violent he could be, because typically we don't see it as much with those characters because, you know, unless it's with Buffy, that he and Buffy are fighting each other. I mean, and that's a more fair fight. But it was kind of as though they wanted to remind us, I guess, of what an actual beast he could be, by showing us that side of him. But it's like, don't get, don't love him too much, everybody. He might be funny and he might be amusing, but don't forget how dangerous he is. But then we see, that in fact he's not as dangerous as he wants to be. Let's put it that way. And by the time he's in this episode, he's looking a bit more pathetic. And when he gets all those arrows stuck in, oh my gosh.
Well, and that's where it's interesting from the story point of view, and you just laid it out well. I mean, we've been going through the series, certainly as viewers, being given so many reasons to despise Spike, to fear Spike. And now that the initiative has done something to him, and then we get in this episode the reason to almost feel bad for him.
Right.
As you pointed out, they did a great job visually at those different points. This whole episode is about the found family coming together, and Spike actually ends up with a seat at the table.
Yes.
I mean, could you have seen that back in season 2 or 3?
Nope.
Yeah.
Even though he and Joyce did get along well there for a bit.
Yeah, well. So this is where it's, for me, very fascinating, and this is where the rewatches just, again, continue to really stay fresh, is to watch some of these character bits and to see that. Now, again, it's, it's neutered Spike, as some folks will call him. So yes, the arrows, multiple arrows as he's lying on the ground and even at the table all tied up can give us a chuckle, but it's still Spike.
Right.
But again, it's showing a bit of the family vibe, at least to me, of how they had to come together and take on a whole bunch of the spirits when they came out. And Spike was nothing more than, a commentator on the ground taking more arrows and telling everybody where somebody was. So,
right.
It was interesting to watch it do that.
Yeah. And I thought that, when you're talking about the seat at the table, I think that very last scene in that episode, no, of course that's funny when Xander, having no idea that it was some big secret, blurts out that, yeah, especially, it was nice that we were all working together again. And he's like, yes, especially since Angel was here. And then everybody turns and looks at Buffy, who had no idea. And of course, Xander, being oblivious to the fact that she didn't know, is continuing to eat. But what struck me about that scene, other than visually how it worked that way, just where they all turn and look at her, is that it's actually a picture of what the new dynamic is going to be. We get to see that this is, a group that has kind of come together, even if it is just, there are more things, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but to me, it represented a new dynamic. Let's put it that way.
Yes, it does. And again, it's showing the changing evolution of relationships and situations, like we talked about, as this show does, bring us through high school and college and how all of our lives change and people come in, people leave. Relationships themselves between people that have been there a while change, and, Spike is a great example of that. But even more kudos to James Marsters, because when Xander does drop that bombshell, the look on his face as he looks at Buffy, if you didn't notice it, folks, feel free to throw it back in and watch it. You can just tell how delicious he thinks it is when he realizes that she didn't know. So again, the actor does a great job bringing that across.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And he's amused by it, but oh yeah, that's, when it's hard, to think of all the, the great things that have come before and to think of all the great things that are yet to come. And so I'm, trying to keep my lips sealed to make sure that I, don't, spill anything like that. But, now is it an appropriate, if I want to make a comment about a quote that Buffy had earlier I think it was during the initiative that how it reminded me of something to do with Winona. Is that acceptable to do? It doesn't really it doesn't involve any spoilers.
All of Winona, is wide open.
Well, there's a point where when Buffy finds out that Spike is back, she says, well, what is it with him? Doesn't he understand that this is my town? And it just reminded me of, Winona and, standing up for Purgatory the way that she does. I mean, because it's the same attitude. Mm-hmm. This is my place to take care of.
Yep.
It may be, it's the larger place where the people you care about are, but it's still, it showed, that was I think a commonality between them for that, not just the feeling, but that they actually say it.
It's an excellent observation, Carol. Yes, it is. Good way of looking at it.
Thank you.
And again, that's part of the fun, these rewatches. You look for these things.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a fun set of eps. Again, without being spoilery, we do have some others, coming up, certainly in season 4, that are really going to catch your attention. Again, not a shocker there, but still, we had a good time with these, and again, we are, as they do, with the 22-episode season, they've got to set up some of the pieces on the chessboard, as we say, and certainly learning a little bit more about the initiative, seeing where Spike is at, is some important stuff going forward.
Right. And as I was saying before, I try to remember, like, the feeling that I had, because I'm pretty sure the first time I ever saw the episode, these many years ago now, that I was pretty surprised. When you see, Riley and, I guess Graham and Parker, or I can't remember what the other guys, and Foster, when they get off.
Forrest, sorry, pardon me.
Yeah. And, when they get off the elevator and you see where they're going. Well, first when they're getting on the elevator, the weird thing with the green light, you're like, what's going on? And I remember, but I want to think that I was fairly surprised by that. And I always appreciate that about anything that I watch. I like to be surprised. I don't want to see something coming, 100 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be surprised as long as it makes sense for the plot, which it does for this. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that, it's still a big reveal, even though it's coming. Just the way that they do it, it's pretty effective, I think.
I would agree completely. Yeah. And those of you that are new, feel free to reach out and let us know, if this is your first time through, your thought on that, because it is quite a reveal to set some things up. So I think with that, we have finished talking in a non-spoilery way for the most part. We want to give some thanks here, as we always do, to the folks at Fangirl Shirts and Sam Winter. Fangirl Shirts has the Buffy Earper t-shirt, and Sam created the graphic where we have Buffy with the Peacemaker and Winona with the stake. Link are in the show notes if you want to take a look at those, folks. But thank you to them for creating those things. And do feel free, to follow the links, support those artists for the things they create if you're interested. But I think what we'll do here, if you are a newbie, now would be the time to tune out, and we appreciate you tuning in to be here with us. But now would be the time to step back, because we're getting ready to move over to our spoiler section, where anything and everything that might have happened in the series is fair game.
Do you think it's a little late to be reading me a warning label?
Just trying to protect you.
All right, so we are back. If you're still here, just to confirm, you don't mind being spoiled on anything and everything that might have happened in Buffy, all 7 seasons. I did have a couple of points to get your thoughts on, and if you have any others, certainly bring them up. I wonder what your thought, because it's easier to discuss in more detail now, since we know where we're going with the initiative. Some folks comparing the initiative to Black Badge. What do you think there, Carol?
I think that there are a lot of parallels. I really do, but I think, there's something, I think, more sinister about the initiative, mainly because of what Walsh was up to, I guess. Given what her experimentation was, kind of working towards, I suppose you could say, what her final goal was. Now, and Black Badge to me was kind of a bit more of a conglomeration of different people who were in it for different reasons, I guess you could say. The initiative seemed to have pretty much a one-track mind, and they were acting kind of with their blinders on. And now that was until Buffy got involved, because in the episodes where she does get involved, later in this season, she asked them, well, they didn't seem to care about why somebody would do something. And she's like, well, she would even ask, well, why are they doing this? What's their well, we don't know. We don't care. It's just like, well, maybe you need to know that, this kind of thing. And I think that maybe Black Badge would be kind of the initiative, upgrade. Just because, well, I think that I think there were more people with different motives than just the one kind of party line kind of thing that the initiative had.
I follow you completely there, yes. I mean, especially with what we got of the initiative and it didn't play out over multiple seasons like Black Badge. So yeah, they got more of a chance. And you're right. As we were introduced to different people in Black Badge, yes, there were some very sinister parts of it, very similar to the initiative, and others where it was grayer on what they were doing. But it's just interesting in both shows to see that that's, you can weave that through in terms of what's going on. It would have been interesting, though, if the initiative, that storyline had been able to maybe play more to what they might have intended. From what I've read, Maggie Walsh, the actress playing her, wanted out of what they were doing or had other opportunities. So they had to kind of spin on that quicker than they wanted to. So it wasn't as robust as it could have been.
Gotcha. And that could be why this season faces some criticism, for some aspects of it. So
yes, because I believe, I'm not an expert, folks, but I do believe from what I've read, yes, they kind of had to spin when they didn't intend to, and that meant kind of grasping at some plot bits that maybe didn't work as great as they might have hoped. I'm not knocking it in any way because it's Buffy, but I do see a lot of folks mention that they think the episodes or the pieces of season 4 maybe turned out better than the whole, unlike some other seasons, maybe for that reason. There's plenty of brilliance here, but it's not quite as tied together as some other seasons are.
Right. But I think, one of the things that occurred to me when I did my whole series rewatch, a few years ago, was that it occurred to me that in this particular season, Buffy is going through, I think sometimes we forget she's a teenager.
Exactly,
she's still a teenager, and the fact that she is trying to negotiate growing up, she's had to grow up in some ways, and yet in other ways she's still the same, she's the age that she is. And, she's trying to grapple with, well, how do I handle being away from home? You want the independence and yet you don't. And, so there are a lot of things where she's just kind of trying to find herself too, I think. And I think that that's a lot of what happens in this season without it being addressed necessarily directly. Probably everybody's least favorite episode. I don't know where it is, in the season. Did you already do Beer Bad?
Yeah, we did, yes, but we had some fun with that. That one is not as bad. This is Kevin's opinion now, and every Buffy fan has a different take. That one to me is not as bad as some other episodes in the series. It's very simplistic, but in its simplicity, sometimes there's still a point. So
Oh yeah, no, I agree. It's just, that one, it's also pretty blatant in terms of,
the subtlety doesn't exist in that.
But it is one of the ones that you could point to and say, well, look, here she is, just this college student, and not just a college student, but a brand new college student.
Yes.
And it's, there's the guy in the beginning of, I think, is it in the beginning of the initiative episode, the vampire she kills? And, he says, well, everything was fine until you came here.
Right.
We were doing just fine. And it's like, well, I was just like 30 miles down the road or however far it is away. The city proper, or where Sunnydale proper is, as opposed to the college, or the university. But anyway, but that was something that struck me about that season, is that she is just trying to navigate becoming an adult, even though she's had to take on, for years has had to take on things that no adult would either be able to handle, or fathom even. It's still, there are other aspects to just being alive, to being a person, living in society, that you have to get through. And it seemed to me as though this season she has to do some of that, for the first time on her own anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, that's what makes for lots of interesting discussions. Certainly I enjoy having is when folks, when they'll do their character studies or their character perspectives on Buffy. I do think it gets minimized. I won't say overlooked, but it gets minimized, the fact that she is doing most of this as a teenager. So that's got to be looked at as a big part of why. And watching that growth side of it, and to me, it keeps a lot of it fresh.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And let's face it, no matter what, I'll take the fourth season, or, I will, if for people who think that it's not good, that it's not the best season, I would take that over most other shows still.
Oh, that is still, yes, hallelujah to that. As many, and I will appreciate, I know even the worst season of Buffy is better than the best season of many other shows.
Just about anything else, yeah.
I'm not going there. But when you have cream of the crop, you have to look at them that way. So it just makes for fun discussions, as we well know.
Oh, yes. And I do think that these particular episodes here do show, and when you think about it, paired up with Winona, that the show, that it does show us how important it is, and it demonstrates to the characters themselves how much better off they are when they work together than when they don't. And, I think that, the fact that even at the end of the episode, I think it's Willow who makes the comment about, and we were all working together again.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was, I think, a significant comment. And we know that it's going to set things up, as I was saying before, that it kind of shows you what the new dynamic is going to be, going forward, because we know, for anybody who has seen past this point of Buffy, knows that they are, Spike is going to become part of the team, even though sometimes there's a little bit of reluctance on his part, and certainly a lot of reluctance on the part of most everybody else, other than Buffy, who sees that, I think Buffy thinks she can kind of keep him under control, so it's okay. And, kind of like Winona with Doc when he's going a little bit off the rails. It's like, well, having him around is still better than not.
Mm-hmm.
If you can keep them, contained to a certain extent so they don't do anything really bad.
Oh, it is. Yes, it is. And that's, again, another one of those parallels of the two shows is the strength of the leads. And despite some of their cohorts telling them someone is or isn't a good match to have involved, they still feel that, all of that come together, they still have a way to make it be more positive than negative.
Right. And they, I think some other parallels between the two characters of Buffy and Winona too are that, they often come across, and they both get criticized for this, throughout the series. Certainly Buffy more than, Winona, but there were many more opportunities to have that be done, but they get criticized for, well, you think you're better than everybody else. Well, no, not necessarily, but I might be better at this particular thing than, other people are. That's like when I, rewatching the very first episode of Winona Earp just recently. And, when she turns 27, when it's midnight on her birthday, and she visibly can feel some kind of physical change come over herself. So she knows she discovers that, yes, I have these extra skills now that I didn't have like 1 minute ago. You might have had the desire, but you didn't have the skill. But I think that, it just goes to show that both of these women have to make some really hard decisions that they get criticized for a lot. But ultimately it's because they feel as though they're responsible for all these people and all these situations, and they feel as though they have the right to make those, those decisions. So.
Yes, and that's what it is. It's that responsibility side. We certainly see that weigh heavily on Winona as the series goes on, and we do see Buffy dealing with it quite a bit as well.
Yep. And there is a bit of an age difference between them, so, gorgeous as Melanie is, we do get the impression of Winona now and then that she's been that that old expression about being rode hard and put up wet. She looks as though she has been put through the ringer. In other words, that she's just had a rough life. And in Buffy's case, some of her stuff was not the same kind of intensity. But, she also had, the things like with her parents getting divorced and, her father, really doing the absentee thing, and all of that. I think that, they're both, they both have their traumatic issues to work out, in addition to being these chosen ones. That's got to be tough.
Yeah, well, it greatly shapes who they become as they both, age up through their respective series. You're right. Buffy is starting it at a much younger age than Winona, but Winona is also dealing in some cases with a lot more, family and real life, hardships than Buffy might
baggage.
Be. Yes, yeah. Baggage, yeah. Again, interesting parts of it. Cool stuff. One other fun thing before we go that I did want to get a chuckle out of, this is the episode with Xander getting sick that we get the Shumash tribe and his, syphilis and other issues. And that's going to come back multiple times in the series, not the least of which is in the musical episode. I just found it, when they first mentioned that in this episode, I'm not sure if it was Buffy or Willow when they were first looking through some of the items that they came across, I couldn't help but chuckle.
Oh, yeah. And there's a comment actually that Xander makes when he and Giles in the beginning are feeling as though they're kind of inconsequential in the whole system or in the whole setup right then. They feel as though they're not being of much use. And well, Buffy's not going to need us because these guys are human. It's not a a supernatural thing. It's before she asked them to go out and patrol, but, they're having this discussion. And then once they find out that they're going to get to do these things, and Xander's getting out the weapons, and they have this discussion. I can't remember exactly what Giles says to him, but Xander makes a comment about, well, I could use this to somehow summon an entity, that will come and wreak havoc here, or, something to that effect anyway. And I'm thinking, oh, dude,
Yes.
in 2 years, yes, you are. But I just thought that was funny that, that there was that mention made that we, did they know this far in advance? Possibly.
Oh, it's possible. If not, it was great timing to bring it all together.
Yes, I agree. And it's, and it's fun to do the comparisons. Because there are a lot of the obvious comparisons between Buffy and Winona Earp. So, that's why you're doing this podcast. But, I think that it can also, kind of translate over into, other things as well. There's a meme I've seen, and I'm not sure who originated it. But it's a supposed conversation between Buffy and Dean Winchester meeting up and having a discussion about what they do and about their families and, stuff like that. I don't know if you've seen that, Kevin, but it's pretty funny. So, I mean, they try, there are ways you can make connections, between a number of different, of these types of these genre shows, but for these two, there are certainly a lot more parallels than there, because of the positions, I think, of the two lead characters.
Yep, couldn't agree with you more. Yep, that's why we have fun going back and re-looking at these episodes and then being able to draw some of those parallels and appreciate them. Keeps our content fresh, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does.
Well, Carol, I really appreciate you sitting down with us for the first time here tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun, and anytime I get an excuse to talk about Buffy or Winona Earp, frankly, I'm perfectly happy. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Oh, totally my pleasure. Always great to get to talk to you. So hope you folks enjoyed our discussion for these two eps. We look forward to any and all feedback. Feel free to send it in. Contact details are always at the very end of the podcast. And as I said, look for our next podcast covering the next two episodes in the coming weeks. We'll try to stay on definitely more of a regular schedule here, as we're between seasons of Earp. So thank you again, gang. We hope you all take care.
Good night.
If you'd like to contact us here at Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV, we offer a wide variety of feedback options, including email at feedback@tuningintoscifitv.com, our voicemail at 706-927-8478, on Skype voicemail at Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV, or you can visit our website at tuningintoscifitv.com to find the link to our forums or to use the SpeakPipe widget to leave us a voice message. You can also find us on Twitter at twitter.com/tuningintosci-fi or on Facebook at facebook.com/tuningintoscifitv.
Listen to Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV on Stitcher Radio On Demand. Download the free app today at Stitcher.com. You've been listening to Buffy Earpers, presented by Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV, Episode 24, recorded June 2021.